I'm endlessly fascinated and curious about the world around us, about business, about politics, about the arts, about culture, developments, social issues, and the people. Most importantly, about the people that are shaping our future. Every night, I get the opportunity to have conversations, to dive into conversations with thought leaders, with change makers, entrepreneurs, politicians, and everyday heroes who unpack the ideas and stories that I think matter to all of us. What's the future of our economy? What's the future of our country? How do we build stronger communities? What can we learn from music, theater, sports, politics, the arts? How does policy shape our real lives? What does leadership look like, real leadership in today's environment? If it's interesting and relevant and topical and we're talking about it, you'll hear about it here at 6 o'clock on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to have real conversations, in-depth conversations. These are ideas we're sharing. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining me. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. So the Liberal Party in Ontario has got a convention coming up, and after every convention, or after every election, there's a rule that the next convention, you got to have a leadership review and vote. If there's a leader that gets defeated, you got to have a vote on whether you want that leader. And I'm not going to, for potentially obvious reasons for people that know what my last name is, make any comments one way or other on how I think people should vote or what I think is going to happen. But Stephen Adler wrote a really interesting article that I read about what he thinks. And the fact that he's a conservative that ended up commenting on this, I think it makes even more interesting. And he's going to, I think, talk about some examples from the past in regards to Joe Clark, other candidates that have gone up for other leaders that have gone up for leadership review, and also potentially some examples and comparisons with Pierre Poilievre. Stephen Adler, I've had the privilege of interviewing before. He's a senior public affairs strategist with a 20-plus year track record of helping organizations navigate government, manage crises, and communicate with authority. He's a senior director at National Public Relations, Canada's leading strategic communications firm. That Stephen leads complex files for high-profile clients across sectors, translating risk into resilience and policy into progress. That's great, translating risk into resilience and policy into progress. I love that. What a great line.
Stephen Adler, I'll let you borrow it if you would like, Brian. It is a good line.
Stephen Adler, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's great to be back, and it's great to be talking politics again with you.
So tell me, why did you write the article? You're a conservative. Why are you writing an article about the Liberal leadership?
So first of all, I'm a political scientist to begin with, and I find it fascinating from the education point of view. But I really wrote the article because it seemed to have become in the public discourse potential leadership candidates versus the current leader without any real discussion of what has to happen. You know, you have a group trying to unseat the leader, but they're really not talking about what are the numbers? How can it be done? Has it been done before? And that's what led me to write it. And it was fun to do the research and fun to write it as well.
So tell me a little bit about the research. Who'd you talk to? What'd you do?
So I spoke to some old-time political people who've been around forever. I also did desktop research. And in my research, I found out that we've had a prime minister who won a majority government but lost the seat in Mackenzie King. I didn't know we had a prime minister who had lost their seat. We always think of opposition leaders losing their seats in an election. And in my research, I went all the way back to Joe Clark in 1983, and I remember sitting and watching the convention with my late father. Joe Clark received 66.7% of the vote, and everybody thought, that's great. He's going to stay on. And he takes the stage and goes to the podium and says, it's not enough to lead the country. And that became the benchmark. You need to get over 66% in a leadership review. And it really got me thinking about what number does Bonnie Crombie need to not win, but lead? And they are two different things. The number has you win. The leadership part is controlling caucus in the party.
But in the leadership convention, which was a year and a bit ago, she got what, 51%, and it was only after 3 or 4 ballots. And so, she didn't get that even on the first ballot. So why is 66.7% such an important number in a leadership review when 51% on the fourth ballot was okay?
Because in between, the people of Ontario have spoken, and the people of Ontario didn't elect her to a seat in Mississauga where she had been mayor for a decade or so. And the people of Ontario kept the party at the third place party. We can get into the why, how it happened, but the main difference, as I say, is one is based on party members looking to the future. The leadership review is party members looking into the past and were we good enough? And it's really two different questions.
Now, what's the Joe Clark, experience? Would the history is that he ran again and lost to Brian Mulroney. Brian Mulroney went on to win the biggest majority in Canadian history, I think it was, or if it wasn't the biggest, it was almost the biggest majority in Canadian history. So that would say that the Conservative Party and Joe Clark made the right decision for him to step down. But if he hadn't stepped down, probably he would have had a good chance of becoming prime minister again, right?
He might have, but this is also a case where it was a different generation. Joe Clark did the honorable thing. He stepped down and then became a candidate in the next leadership convention. And you're right, Brian Mulroney wins the biggest majority possibly ever in the House of Commons. And one of the first things that Brian Mulroney did upon becoming leader of the Conservative Party was to appoint a Joe Clark loyalist, Eric Nielsen, the number 2 in the House and the opposition benches. Then, of course, he welcomed Joe Clark into cabinet as Secretary of State for External Affairs, the right hand to Prime Minister Mulroney. Where I'm going with this is there wasn't caucus disunity funneling and fueling a second fight. Mr. Clark said it wasn't enough. He tossed his hat in the ring. It was a legitimate fight. And then the caucus unified around the new leader. What we're not seeing provincially with the Liberal Party is the party and the entire caucus publicly and privately rallying around the leader.
So I'm going to challenge you on that. I thought the caucus had rallied, but it was the party that's the issue, or at least some former candidates. So how do you separate out caucus versus party and former leadership competitors?
So what I mean by the caucus not rallying around, they're doing and saying all the right things, but no one, as an example, has stepped forward to offer their seat in a by-election. Yes, the party and former leadership candidates have thrown in their hats in the ring and are muddying the waters, but just from my outsider looking in, I don't see the overwhelming love-in that we saw a year and a half ago when she was first elected leader of the party.
So what do you think is going to happen? What's your sense of things? You've talked to lots of people. Give me your analysis.
So, if I could predict the future properly, I would be in Vegas betting on next year's Super Bowl before the NFL season begins. I don't want to sound quaint when I say the following. Miss Crombie is either going to get 75, 80%, or it's going to be below. I don't have a read on the delegate tracking and where it's going. I will say this. It's a horse race. And the end result could be a big victory for the incumbent leader. But to get those numbers, Ms. Crombie has to work every single hour of every single day, convincing the delegates that she deserves the right to continue as leader. If she doesn't work hard, and I'm not saying she's not, but if the work isn't put in, then the number will creep up, those against her. And we're hearing names from everywhere. We're hearing former federal cabinet ministers potentially being bantied around. We're hearing current Liberal MPs. We're hearing former provincial Liberal MPs all being asked, if there's a leadership fight, will you run? You're not asked those questions unless you're putting things together in a potential leadership fight.
So tell us some of the names that you're hearing.
So I'm hearing Karina Gold. We're hearing Nathan Ernst Smith. We're even hearing Marco Mendocino possibly throwing his hat in the ring. There are enough names being spoken about that makes me think there is a grassroots movement that is more than just aligned with one candidate uh, who are displeased with the results.
I'd
I
heard the
think
former mayor of Barrie, and I'd heard the former minister of science and technology.
correct. I've heard those names as well. I mean, one thing we have to remember is that when a new leader is elected, you want to get the leader into the legislature as quickly as possible. That didn't happen. Then the Liberal Party looked for ridings where she could run. St. Paul's was talked as a possibility of one amongst others. The former mayor of Mississauga runs in a Mississauga riding and loses. We can discuss the fact that Patrick Brown's mother-in-law won the seat. The Conservatives put a lot of resources into it. But at the end of the day, the former mayor couldn't hold the Mississauga seat. And I think that's what's leading to a lot of the concern amongst party members going into the leadership review.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with our guest, Stephen Adler of National Public Relations, talking about the upcoming Liberal leadership review that's at the Liberal convention and what he thinks is going to happen. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I'm chatting tonight with Stephen Adler. He is a senior director with National Public Relations. He advises companies on politics, on public relations, on what's going on. He's been active within the Conservative Party. How long, Stephen? How long have you been active within the Conservative Party?
So I got my first membership when I was 12, and that was in that was 1983. And former MP Deckert's brother is the one who got me my membership when I was that young in the Hamilton area. I grew up with the stories of Lincoln Alexander and Sean O'Sullivan and Ellen Fairclough. So I'm a conservative because of three trendsetters in the Conservative Party from days gone by.
Well, you and I have something in common. I got my first membership when I was 12 years old too, and voted in a Liberal leadership campaign where my second cousin Bob Nixon was running for leader of the Liberal Party. My great uncle is the leader. He was the premier of Ontario in 1943, 1944. The last Liberal leader for something like 42 years until David Peterson became leader again. And so that's
And Steve Paikin goes out and meets with your cousin every year or so, and they have lunch with the former treasurer. And it's one of my favorite things to watch is that interview with Mr. Nixon.
well, Bob Nixon's a great guy. So I thought it was interesting that you chose to write an article about the Liberal leadership when you're a conservative. And why did you decide to do that?
Part of it is because going back to the election, there's all this rhetoric coming out that it was a surprise election. Because it was a surprise election, the Liberal Party of Ontario wasn't as ready as they needed to be. It wasn't a surprise election. People knew that the premier was thinking about going before a federal election. History shows that we have one party in power provincially in Ontario and a different party in power in Ottawa. The surprise was, the prime minister resigning, a Liberal leadership, Prime Minister Carney, then Mark Carney becoming prime minister and going to the polls. And so I was reading the rhetoric and spin about how part of the reason the Liberals weren't prepared was it was a snap election. And then I remember watching the riding, and it was a targeted riding for me to observe because you have the mother-in-law of Patrick Brown against the former mayor of Mississauga. And I started hearing rumblings in week 1, week 2, that the numbers were close, that the Liberals were behind, that it was all going to get out the vote. And I was shocked because, in my opinion, on paper, if you're the mayor of Mississauga running in a Mississauga ward, you should be leaps and bounds ahead based on name recognition. Then I started hearing things like the Conservatives had sent an A team in to run the campaign. And the Liberals were struggling to get volunteers and were reallocating resources to that riding. And then, the successor mayor of Mississauga, Mayor Parrish, didn't openly endorse uh, uh, Bonnie Crombie. And you had some councillors who were Liberals who were not openly endorsing Bonnie Crombie in that riding. And I started watching it. And then election night, the returns come in, and my WhatsApp is blowing up with numbers showing that the Conservatives are winning it. And that's really what got my thinking towards this leadership review was election night and the days and weeks leading up to it. And then after the election, no one was thrown under a bus. And in Canadian politics, we like to win, but we like to blame someone if we lose. And no one was thrown under the bus, which has now brought us to the leadership. And that's part of why I wrote that column.
So compare her situation, if you could, with Pierre Poilievre. So are you suggesting that Pierre Poilievre and her both increased the vote share, both increased the number of seats, and both lost their ridings? So why is it different for her than Pierre Poilievre?
I think one of the biggest reasons is that the grassroots of the Conservative Party overwhelmingly support Mr. Poilievre as the leader. And you had some disgruntledness that the election was lost, but it was never a giant question of whether or not Mr. Poilievre would continue as leader. Election night, you had an MP step down and offer his riding to Mr. Poilievre as soon as a by-election could be called. And that is a big fundamental difference. Caucus supported, the party supported, and there was a by-election quickly announced for him to run in.
What do you think is going to happen
with Mr. Poilievre or with Bonnie? With Pierre
frankly,
Poilievre,
with both. I'd be interested in your opinion on both.
So I look at this longest ballot crusade of 200 plus names is hysterical on one side and disgusting on the other side. You have to write in the name of the candidate in the federal by-election. I think Mr. Poilievre is overwhelmingly reelected or elected in the Alberta seat. I think that whether he gets 90%, 70%, or 60%, it is a large mandate to continue to lead the Conservative Party of Canada from inside the House of Commons, where you need to be if you are the leader of a party. I think provincially, if Bonnie Crombie secures the leadership with 65 to 75%, and it is enough to continue, Bonnie Crombie has to find a by-election and get into the House, the Ontario legislature. No more leading from the outside. If Bonnie Crombie doesn't secure 65% of the vote, then I think the party needs to go to a leadership contest and needs to get someone into the Ontario legislature to lead the party.
Yeah, a lot of those people that you mentioned, Karina Gold and Nathan Erskine Smith and Navdeep Bains and et cetera, they'd have the same problem. They're not in the legislature, and so they'd still have to run somewhere, win, and get elected. I've heard contradictory points of view. I've heard some people say that this is the worst time to have a leadership, that we should focus in on putting forward the policies to combat Doug Ford, to build up the party, to raise money, to do all those things. And then other people have said, no, leadership is the best way to rebuild a party, and get more people involved and get more dynamism, et cetera, et cetera. Where do you come out on that? Is a leadership review and convention helpful to build a party or harmful in building a party?
It actually depends on the results. So if Bonnie Crombie can get 70% or more in the leadership review, she's freed up to recruit, rebuild, and move forward. And that will allow the Liberal Party of Ontario to stop being a follower of what the government is doing, but maybe introduce some policies and try to be out front. We always say a leadership convention is to rebuild the party. You don't need to rebuild the party if you have a strong leader with a strong mandate, both of caucus and of the party. It's the real question in my mind is, will the people see the number to be high enough? Because optics matter, numbers matter, and momentum matters when you are a leader. And the leadership review can put a nail in the discussion of, do we need a new leader, and allow Ms. Crombie to move forward as leader, or it's going to rip open wounds of past leadership battles and keep that discussion going. At the end of the day, if Bonnie Crombie doesn't come out as a strong leader of the provincial Liberal Party, the winners are the NDP fighting for the left side of the aisle votes, and of course, Premier Ford, who will continue to see a split opposition arguing amongst themselves as he moves forward implementing his mandate.
So let's talk about rebuilding the party. I understand she's come out with a video where she actually, talks about a couple of the things that went wrong. And you mentioned sort of the late nomination of a bunch of candidates. There's some criticism of the Central Party that they may have not have had enough focus on specific ridings, and they therefore. Unlike the NDP that concentrates their attention and their effort and their vote and make sure that they therefore deliver seats equal to the votes, the Liberals did the opposite, tried to sort of be everywhere. So from the outside, what's your sense? Does the Liberal Party need to rebuild itself, or no, it's got everything hunky-dory?
I think there are systemic flaws with how the Liberal Party has moved forward. In 2018, when the election was lost, it could be argued that the people of Ontario wanted a different party to come into power. In 2022, it could be argued that it was a bit hard to recruit some candidates because you had been in the wilderness for 4 years and you had been in government. In 2025, you had issues recruiting candidates, raising money, because now you had been in the wilderness since 2018. The Liberal Party of Ontario can't afford to have 4 elections in a row where they are not able to nominate candidates, are lacking on policy development, and lacking on the operations to implement a good campaign. And that's really the biggest challenge. Will it be a drive for 4? Or will the ship be righted? As a conservative, I don't mind if the ship remains a bit wobbly in different ridings across Ontario. But for the leader of the Liberal Party, the caucus, and the members, they need to right the ship for it to have a fighting chance moving forward.
Stephen Del Duca won 51% on the first ballot, and people were shocked that he did so. I think a lot of people were surprised that he did so incredibly well on that first ballot. Bonnie Crombie won 51%. I think it was on, I can't remember, it was either the third or the fourth ballot. And so she didn't have as much early support as Stephen Del Duca, but she did better than Del Duca. So what's the answer there? What's the finding there? What's the implication?
But yes, she did better. And there were also some traditional seats that they were not able to win again. The answer is every election's different. And Del Duca did better in some areas and worse in others. Then you rebuild the party for 4 years, and expectations were high amongst Liberals that I was talking to that at worst they were going to be official opposition, that the NDP's goose was cooked, and it didn't happen. And so the why is strategically, every party identifies a ranking of ridings from the easiest to win to the hardest to win, and that's how you allocate resources. Your biggest and best ridings should not be where you're putting in resources the last week of the campaign. What we saw in the last provincial election was ridings that maybe shouldn't have needed resources had extra resources going in that hurt in some ridings that were very, very close. So, what do they need to do? They need to rebuild, they need to lead, and they need to end the infighting and the bickering and have it done.
The day before election day, Doug Ford, the premier, I think went to a big Polish church in her riding and had a big rally. She's Polish. In her riding. That's sort of like overkill, isn't it? That's almost not nice. Like that's to go to
That's
your
pro-
own church, your own ethnic church in the other leaders riding. Like that's like a dagger through the heart, isn't it?
I would flip it around. Why were the polls and the support for the liberal leader in her own riding not strong enough that the conservative brass said we're not sending the premier there the day before the election? The last couple of days before an election, party leaders go around to secure the vote, rally the troops. They may go to a riding where getting the premier or the leader there will move it from a tie to a win. And so I thought it was great. That was to me one of the times where, yeah, this is as close as everybody is saying if the premier's going into that riding. And lo and behold, the Conservatives won the riding. So him going in there was a brilliant piece of strategy.
That's an interesting point of view. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Stephen Adler of National Public Relations talking about the upcoming leadership review at the upcoming Liberal convention in Ontario and what he thinks is going to happen. He wrote a really interesting article that I read and asked him to come on the show. I'm trying to be completely objective and not have a point of view on here for obvious reasons because I share a last name with one of the individuals involved, the individual involved. So I'm not going to make a comment, but I'm interested in what Stephen's got to say. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. My guest tonight is Stephen Adler. We're talking about the upcoming Liberal convention where there's going to be a leadership review. Stephen Adler is a senior public affairs strategist. He's got over 20 years of experience helping organizations navigate government, manage crises, and communicate with authority. He's a senior director at National Public Relations, one of Canada's leading strategic communications firms. He's a long-term conservative, and I read this fascinating article he wrote where here's this conservative that's analyzing the Liberal leadership review and assessing what he thinks is going to happen. Stephen, I got this sense that politics was a lot more antagonistic in this last campaign than it has been in the past. Patrick Brown, his mother-in-law, and I guess you got to support your mother-in-law, but his mother-in-law was running against Bonnie Crombie. But Patrick Brown and Bonnie Crombie were in Parliament together at one point in time, I believe, and they were mayors of neighboring cities. What do you take of that? Has politics become far more adversarial?
I think it has. A generation ago, you would see a cabinet minister and an opposition member in the House of Commons yelling and screaming during question period at each other. And then after, you would go to the members' dining room and you'd see them sitting at a table together, laughing like old friends. I don't see that anymore. I don't see the cross-party friendship, both on the staff level, but more importantly, on the elected side of it. And I think that is one of a big change. We've gone from attacking the idea to attacking the person. And that's really the big difference. As far as, Bonnie Crombie versus Patrick Brown, my opinion is that I think it goes back to Peel regional politics. When Mayor Brown and Bonnie Crombie was mayor of Mississauga, there was a lot of talk about breaking up Peel region. There's always been talk about, does Brampton get everything in return for the money they give into Peel region? Mississauga, the same thing. And I wonder if a lot of that has to go back to sitting around the Peel Regional Council table and arguing on behalf of their municipalities. And, I know Mayor Brown. Mayor Brown is a good, smart, honest politician, but more importantly, he is a good person. And personal attacks, I'm sure, I'm sure personal attacks bothered him and upset him. Moving to the provincial election, we also need to remember that it wasn't an initial, I'm going to run in this riding by Bonnie Crombie and the Liberal Party. Ridings were gobbled up by other Liberal candidates. And lo and behold, it seemed this was the only riding left for her to run in Mississauga or Toronto. And I think that, yes, Patrick Brown's mother in law sought the nomination and won it. But let's not forget, she is a very good candidate, a very strong candidate who comes from a political machine herself. Her brother is an MPP in the Conservative caucus as well. And I think it was just, you know, a lot of different issues at play, bringing people to support the Conservative Party and Sylvia, the candidate, but also to work against Bonnie Crombie, both because of municipal personality conflict and then, of course, Conservatives wanting to take down another party's leader. We've been on the receiving end before of our party leader losing their seat and having to run in a by-election. And I think it was an opportunity to rewrite some history for some older conservatives who remember our party leaders losing election results as well.
So was it like a Patrick Brown vendetta against her that was an issue?
I don't think it was a vendetta, but let's also be very honest. Patrick Brown is one of the greatest organizers our country has ever seen when it comes to political organizations. He mobilized giant swaths of communities to come out and go door knocking and to do lit drops. And that's what elections are all about. Yes, it's identifying the vote so that you can make sure you have one more voter than your opponents, but you also have to get the people to the polls and remind them. And what Patrick Brown, specifically in the Conservative Party of Ontario, did was they mobilized enough people to work across the riding to get that done. And, whether it was a personal vendetta or not, I don't know. I've never asked Mayor Brown that question. I doubt I ever will. But whatever the reason for volunteers to get active in that riding on behalf of the Conservative Party of Ontario, it worked.
It was the only riding, I believe, that didn't have an incumbent. So it should have been easier to win, shouldn't it have?
In paper, yes. On paper, you have an individual who has represented a city federally and municipally for decades, has the name recognition. It should have been, in my opinion, an easy victory. It wasn't. And I think that's what is leading to some questioning by grassroots members of the Ontario Liberal Party heading into the leadership review. Where will Bonnie Crombie run for a seat, and can she win? If in my research, I found out that William Lyon Mackenzie King led the Liberal Party to an election of a majority government in the House of Commons, but the Prime Minister lost the seat. He ran elsewhere. That's about different. That was in the 30s and 40s, and times were different then.
Remind us what happened. Tell us what happened. Did he run in a by-election and win and get and still remain Prime Minister?
He did. He did. He lost his seat in the general election, ran in a by-election. I want to say he ran in Ontario in the by-election and was Prime Minister of Canada after that by-election. So we do have situations where party leaders have lost and been elected in by-elections. We have situations where men and women are elected leaders of a party without a seat and grab the first opportunity. The first one I remember is Brian Mulroney running in Nova Scotia and Elmer MacKay's seat in 83 so that they could get, maybe it was 84, so that they could get Mr. Mulroney into the House of Commons as the leader of the opposition. That seat went to Elmer's son Peter many years later. And we have many instances of that. Ernie Eves leaves the Ontario legislature, is elected leader of the Ontario PC party, runs in a by-election, and returns to the legislature. It is shocking to me that there hasn't been a bigger push for the leader of the Liberal Party to be inside the legislature.
So there was a push when Milton had a by-election, and Milton is obviously a neighboring riding and city to Mississauga, which was after her election as the Liberal leader before Doug Ford called the provincial election. And there are some people that said that she should run and get in the legislature, and that would have been positive. And other people said, no, don't, because Milton's not Mississauga. You're not going to have the name recognition. You're not going to have the name awareness. You're not going to have the big push that you would in Mississauga. And if you then lose, you're out of luck, and it's a real problem. What do you think? Should she have run in Milton?
I do. Look, had the provincial election results been different, we wouldn't be talking about her needing to get into the Ontario legislature. I'm a firm believer that leaders should be in the legislature, whether it be the House of Commons or provincial legislature. I've always thought that. I think that there is importance to stand across and ask that first question on behalf of your party to the government of the day and get the media clips and whatnot from that. Obviously, those inside the Liberal Party looked at polling and a number of other things and made the decision that Milton was not the correct place for her to run in a by-election. Okay, fine. But staying out didn't get you official opposition and didn't win a government for you. So therefore, I look at it and say, maybe they should have taken that chance, because at least there would have been an incumbency in the general election running for re-election rather than looking for a seat.
So if the Ontario Liberal Party hired National Public Relations and Stephen Adler to advise them today, what would you be telling them to do?
So I don't think they would hire us because we don't do that partisan work. But let's just say for a moment that I was having a drink and someone asked me my opinion of any of the parties. My opinion would be the leader has just won a party leadership contest, but a party leadership contest is not the general public and the general electorate. The first opportunity, get into the legislature. When it's a by-election, you can devote all of your resources to that one area. You're not competing against 25 or 30 other seats. If you have a caucus of 18, you can have 18 polls a day canvassed by your elected members on behalf of the leader. You'll bring in volunteers from all these ridings and other ridings. They should always run as quickly as possible.
And if they asked you today about this upcoming leadership review, what would your advice be?
I would be saying fight tooth and nail, meet every delegate of the party and ask them for your support and convince them why they should support you. Don't go ahead making the assumption that they will support. Ask for their vote and ask what was done wrong and what should I try to correct moving forward. It's all about trust. It's all about having the people trust you and vote for you. If they don't, it doesn't matter if they like you. They need to trust you to vote for you.
We're going to take a break. We're going to come back in just 2 minutes with some final concluding comments. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Stephen Adler of National Public Relations, a conservative activist who's written a really interesting article about what he thinks is going to happen and should happen at the upcoming Liberal leadership review in the province of Ontario. And I've tried very hard to stay completely objective and just ask questions because I don't want to get involved in this issue at all. But I'm interested in it because I've been a lifelong political hack and a liberal actually, though I try to be nonpartisan of late. Stephen, I've had some people tell me that the Liberal Party tried to out-conservative the Conservatives in the last election by moving to the right, and that was a mistake. And other people said no, that Kathleen Wynne and people took the Liberal Party way to the left, and coming back to the center was the right strategy. So, what's your sense? Is the Liberal Party right when it goes right, or right when it goes left?
I think the Liberal Party traditionally was the centrist party. And I think the Liberal Party spent too much time trying to show that they were the anti-PC option rather than coming forward with policies that resonated to the people across Ontario. You know, you you don't change what is working for you. So the question of is the Liberal Party too far to the right or too far to the left is because they've lost re-elections in a row. Mr. Ford, the premier, has done a brilliant job in reaching out to population segments that are not traditional conservative voters. You only have to look at the unions. The private unions, the non-public sector unions, overwhelmingly supported the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario. And that is because of the great work that former Minister Monty McNaughton and Doug Ford did to listen to what they were saying, react, and introduce legislation that may not have been traditional conservative legislation, but it's what was wanted. So the Liberal Party needs to find their groove. I hope they don't. Liberals, do not take my advice. I like having a progressive conservative government, but they really have to move beyond being the anti-PC option to being having a vision that is positive and is moving towards the future of what the people want. If they can't do that, it doesn't matter if it comes from the right or the left, they won't be successful.
Okay, let me ask you one last question, if I could. If you were advising Nathan Erskine-Smith or Karina Gold or whoever some of these people are that are potentially, it would seem by rumors are thinking about it, what would your advice to them be? Because if they're too aggressive and out there, then they look disloyal and they risk having a blowback against them. But if they do nothing, then they have missed that opportunity. So what's your advice to somebody that was interested?
First of all, I'd have them redefine the question of turning it away from the individual candidate to the betterment of the party, doing this for the future of the party. Take the word I out, take the word me out. It's for the team. And then turn the review into a renewal. Show how every riding from across Ontario, from Thunder Bay to Ottawa, up to the north, has a voice and why their voice is important, and that they would listen to the actual issues of concern and represent all Ontarians and all Liberals. If you can turn it from review into renewal, then the leadership discussion answers itself because the people will support that candidate. If it's all me, I can do better, vote for me, instead of her, you're not showing a vision of why the party should take a step into a different direction.
Stephen Adler, this has been an interesting conversation. I really appreciate it. We're going to have to talk with you maybe the day before or the day after the convention. It'll be interesting.
Thank you for having me on, and I love talking politics with you, Brian, and I look forward to coming back to talking to you and to your listeners again.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining. I remind you on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online from across Ontario and Canada and the world at www.saga960am.ca. I put all my podcasts and videocasts up on my website, briancrombie.com, and on social media and on YouTube, on the YouTube channel, on numerous different podcast servers as soon as the radio show goes to air. So there's lots of different places that you can hear Stephen Adler and myself, and none of my points of view, because I've been completely objective tonight and not committed one way or the other, but you can hear Stephen Adler's very interesting comments. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.